Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, and a panel of some amazing Nigerian minds, wonderful academics that have been talking about the issue of corruption in the elections and on the elections in general. There are also some civil society groups and policymakers on board today. All we need you to do is to sit back, relax, and listen to the discussion as it unfolds. And if you do have a burning question, pop it into our Q&A or into our chat box. And when the time arises, Godfred will share it with the panelists and get their views on your thoughts. To let you know, we are live streaming the event today via our Facebook page and via our Twitter handles. So do tell your friends to join us if they haven't done so yet. And if you want to tweet about our event today, please feel free to tweet and use the hashtag TCA Science Policy Dialogue. So without further ado, I'm going to get the show on the road. And to start off proceedings, I'm going to hand over to our West Africa regional editor, Adejwan Soyinka, and he's going to give us a quick welcome. Adejwan, over to you.
Thank you, Candice, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My task is very simple. You've asked me to do a quick welcome. That's 2 words. So I'm just going to say quick and welcome, right? but more than that, actually, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of my colleagues in the West African region of the Conversation Africa, and of course on behalf of the entire Conversation Africa team and leadership across the continent. We'd like to welcome you to this latest dialogue in our series of science policy dialogue. Thank you for taking our time to join us this morning, and a special welcome also to our keynote speaker, Mr. Wilson Wujare, who is the spokesman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in Nigeria, and to all our panelists who have also taken time to join us this morning. For those of us who may be wondering, so who is the Conversation Africa and what do we do and what do we stand for? The Conversation is a news and analysis media organization. We work with academics and scientists and researchers. We help them to translate and publish their research and insights into everyday language, into materials that are easily accessible to mass audience and to people who would love to consume news and analysis through mass media platforms. And we publish on our website, which is accessible for free across the world. Our work and our mission is to increase the visibility of African scientists and make sure that the wealth of knowledge and research that often reside exclusively within the corridors of the universities or on the pages of peer-reviewed journals is now made democratized, opened up, placed in the hands of members of the public, and most importantly also placed in the hands of policymakers who can make good use of these insights and of these research findings to facilitate evidence-based policies, which, of course, you will agree with me, our continent dearly needs at this time more than ever before. Since we launched in 2015, the Conversation Africa has published over 4,700 scientists and researchers, and their combined articles have been read over 90 million times worldwide by our readers in different parts of the globe, proving that our communities want to hear from experts who know about what they're talking about, whose views are research-based and research-backed. Now, the TC Africa, the Conversation Africa, does not exist on its own. It's also a part of a global network of conversation editions in the US, in the United Kingdom, France, in Canada, Indonesia, Australia, and Spain, to mention a few. We started this particular dialogue series in the midst of COVID-19 outbreak in 2021. And our very first edition was an attempt to look at Nigeria's response to COVID-19 outbreak and the preparedness of Nigeria for the next pandemic. Keynote at that event was delivered by Nigeria's Minister of State for Health, Dr. Olorunnibe Mamora. We've gone ahead to host similar policy dialogues in Ghana, where we had a keynote address from the health advisor to the president of Ghana, Professor Asare. We've had similar events in Nairobi, Kenya. We've had similar events in Johannesburg, South Africa. And at each of these events, our aim and what we've tried to do was to further breach the gap, the wide gulf that often exists between policymakers and academia. We created this platform as an opportunity for academic experts to rub minds with policymakers in the full glare of our media partners and members of the public, so that we can engender robust exchange of insights, ideas, and bring up solutions to burning societal issues. So I imagine that today is not going to be different. We'll be focusing on the general election, the just concluded general election in Nigeria, and illustrating the impact that corruption may have played on the conduct and outcome of the election. And obviously, you will agree with me that this is very much in the interest of democracy and the entrenchment of good governance in Nigeria, that is also the largest democracy on the continent of Africa. So I look forward to a robust keynote by the spokesman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, who is incidentally is also at one time a senior colleague of mine at Tel magazine, and I also look forward to a very robust session after his keynote, coming from the panelists who are representing the academic world, researchers, as well as civil society players in Nigeria. Thank you and welcome once again. Over to you, Candice.
Thanks so much, Adejwan. I'm sure we're going to have a very robust discussion, and thank you for name dropping that Mr. Uwarajan from your previous life. But it's not going to help you today, but we hope that we enjoy the keynote by the EFCC. Pardon me. Yep. Perfect. Godfred, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you so much for moderating this event. It's over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Candice, and thank you very much, Adejuwon Soyinka. So, like my colleague Candice said, my name is Godfred Akoto-Boafo. I am based in Accra, Ghana, but it's a very small world, kind courtesy of technology. And Nigeria's place in Africa is undisputed. And as the regional editor for Conversation West Africa said, Adejuwon Soyinka said, it is an important election every time Nigeria goes to the polls. And so it was on February 25th, 2023, when Nigerians voted in a general election for presidential and National Assembly candidates. Now, there were 93 million Nigerians on the voters list, but by the time voting took place, a little over 23 million, a little over 25 million, I must say, had voted. Now, this is considered a really, really low turnout for an election in a country like Nigeria. Now, data from the Independent National Electoral Commission, the INEC, indicated that voter turnout has been declining almost every election year since 2007. So, for instance, if you go to 2007, it was 57.5%. In 2011, it was 53.7%. In 2015, 43.7%. And in 2019, it was 34%. While 2023 recorded a 28.63% voter turnout. So the numbers, as you can tell, not very impressive. Now, a couple of factors have been blamed for this voter apathy. One of them is the impact of corruption and what it has done in making Nigerians lose interest and trust in the electoral process. The feeling in some quarters is that voters just don't count anymore. And it's not a feeling that is exclusive to just Nigeria. It seems to be a thing that is spreading throughout the African continent and particularly through African elections. Now, in fairness, the INEC in Nigeria, which is the Independent National Electoral Commission, has taken steps to increase voters' trust in the process, including the introduction of the biometric voters accreditation system, popularly called the BVAS. It became very popular on social media during the election. The Nigerian government also took steps to arrest the impact of corruption before, during, and after the election. Checkmating vote buying was one of the reasons adduced for the introduction of new currencies and the restriction of cash withdrawals by the Central Bank of Nigeria in the run-up to the election. Now, the EFCC, which is the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission of Nigeria, also took steps to check vote buying and other forms of corruption at every stage of the process, including maintaining a physical presence at the primaries convention of leading parties where money is known to, historically play a huge role in who emerges as party candidates, as well as deploying their men to some polling units across the country on election day itself. The big question, though, is, did these efforts pay off, or were they too little, too late? That is what we are here to discover. And to help us, give us some insight, is the spokesperson of the EFCC, Mr. Wilson Owujaren. He's going to tell us about how the government preempted corruption in the just ended election. Now, a bit about Mr. Wilson Owujaren, who is a deputy director and spokesperson of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. He has a communication strategy background, very, very good for the kind of job he has, and he's been driving the commission's communication and brand management. Now, before joining the EFCC, Mr. Owujaren was an award-winning journalist who had worked in a number of media organizations in Nigeria, notably Tell and News magazines, which is where Adejuwon was name dropping. He left Tell magazine as assistant editor on the business and economy desk to join the EFCC. He holds a bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Benin and Lagos, respectively, and has attended many courses locally and abroad, including the new manager's course at the University of Cape Town Business School in South Africa, and is also a member of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations. So we do have somebody who is uniquely positioned and qualified to talk to us, communicate to us, one, about this, and also expand on what the EFCC, his organization, did to monitor corruption during the just ended elections. And just before I hand over the microphone to Mr. Owujaren, let me just make a quick announcement and saying that, for participants who have joined us, we have the Q&A running, and there's a chat box. So I'd like to encourage participants to drop their questions in one of those. Now, speakers who can and want to engage with the questions there, we'll also have a Q&A session after the panel where we'll be able to flag some of the questions to the panelists. So that is just my quick one. So without much ado, let me just invite Mr. Wilson Owujaren to deliver the keynote address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be on this platform. I want to thank the Conversation Africa for the invitation extended to me. And on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Osita Wanja, I want to send his apology. He was supposed to be here, but for one or two other engagements that he had, he's not with us this morning. But I hope I'll be able to fill in the gap for him. The issues are not issues that are strange to me. I'm familiar with the work that the Commission has been doing in terms of helping to enhance the integrity of the Nigerian electoral process. We have had to play an immense role in electioneering in Nigeria since 2007, when the Commission first issued an advisory on election. That happened during the tenure of Mr. Nuhu Ribadu, who was the first executive chairman of the EFCC. On that occasion, the Commission came out with a list of persons that were under investigation or prosecution for corruption. And the essence of that advisory at the time was to give the electorate some bits of information on the integrity of people seeking election into position of power and authority, so that we don't give the keys to the treasury to supposed thieves. But that step by the Commission at the time elicited a pushback from the political class. They felt that coming out with that kind of advisory at the time was like tantamount to naming and shaming, and that the measure was against the provision of the Constitution, which gives persons under investigation or prosecution for corruption assumes that they are innocent until they are proven otherwise in the court of law. But the Commission has since moved beyond that. We no longer give advisory at this time, and we have embraced other measures to try to improve the integrity of the electoral process in Nigeria. What we have done recently more or less has to do with checking financial inducement of electorates and other actors within the electoral process. First of all, we have looked at the law. I'd also just need to point it out that part of the reason why the Commission actually got more involved in the electoral process was the observation that the Nigerian electoral body, the INEC, does not have the skill set to do some of the investigation that arise from the electionary process, especially when it comes to issues of financial malpractices that borders on criminality. And EFCC being the sole agency in Nigeria that has the mandate for the enforcement of all economic and financial laws in the country, the Commission felt that it could come in to play a role in assisting the Commission in detecting some of these malpractices that undermines the integrity of our electoral process. So beyond issuing the advisories, when we started, we have made some progress in terms of checking the influence of money in the electoral process, ensuring that the provisions of the Electoral Act in terms of the limit of spending by candidates seeking election into various offices, that they abide by those spending limits. And some of you who have followed the process that we have in Nigeria will recall that a few years ago, specifically in 2015, the Commission was able to get intelligence about how a sum of $115 million was actually shared amongst leading members of the then ruling People's Democratic Party by a minister in the government of President Goodluck Jonathan, just to influence the outcome of that election. That information, that investigation, for instance, led to a major investigation that led to the prosecution of a number of prominent personalities in that government, and some of those cases are still in court. But coming to the issue, the discussion today about the 2023 general elections, we have learned from previous elections, and the determination of the Commission before the election itself was to ensure that as much as possible we reduce the influence of money in the process by denying persons that have access to unexplained wealth the opportunity to unleash those wealth on the hapless electorate, and by so doing, preventing them from actually having their say in the electoral process. And before the actual election itself, the Commission executed a strategy, a two-pronged strategy, so to speak. There was part of the strategy was to go out on a sensitization and enlargement outreach to educate stakeholders within the electoral process on the dangers of voter inducement and other financial malpractices. We did this in collaboration with INEC and other security agencies that are involved in the election management. Apart from the collaborative effort that we did with them, the Commission on itself also made resources available for public enlightenment on all channels of the mass media, educating people on what the law says in terms of the use of money in elections and the dangers that they will face if they violate those laws. Those enlightenment programs, I think, was a bit helpful in terms of getting people to be conscious of what the law says and their duties and responsibility under the law. Apart from that, the Commission took extra measures by also engaging stakeholders, especially stakeholders within the financial sectors. The financial sectors, I'm talking about banks and bureau de change operators, especially bureau de change operators. From our previous experience, we have that understanding through evidence that most of the illicit funds in the system goes through these channels in getting to people that will unleash those funds on voters and compromise the process. So the Commission engaged operators in the bureau de change market and banks to sensitize them on their responsibility, especially on the law, under the law. The money laundering law, for instance, make provision on the limit to which an individual can, monies that an individual can take out of banks at a go. And banks also have a responsibility to report suspicious transactions to both the EFCC and the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit. So we call them to a town hall session, so to speak, to sensitize them and also warn them about allowing their institutions to be used as machinery to compromise the electoral process. Beyond sensitization, the commission asked the gentleman who did the introduction made mention of, we deployed on the election day, we deployed our operatives throughout the federation. Anybody that went out to vote on that, either during the presidential or governorship and National Assembly election, or the governorship and state house of assembly election that happened 2 weeks later, would appreciate the fact that operatives of the commission were visible throughout the country. Apart from the deterrence effect of the mere presence of those officers in polling units, and they were able to make a number of arrests of people who had list of voters and their bank details, supposedly for them to have financial benefit for voting candidates of their choice. And those arrests were made, and the investigations are still ongoing. I'm very sure that in a couple of weeks from now, cases will start commencing in courts. So those were deterrence measures that the commission embarked upon. And we also recovered some assets in terms of cash and items, surprisingly clothing materials and food items from people at various polling units. Maybe I should also point out this fact that apart from the presence of the operatives of the commission, which we believe actually deterred people from using money to buy votes during that election, the monetary policies of the government, especially the Naira redesign, also helped us because there was this scarcity of cash during that election. And so most gladiators within the political establishment could not have access to the resources which ordinarily they would have unleashed on the system. So money was just not available, and that also helped the strategy of the EFCC, because our major concern was to deny politicians, especially corrupt politicians, the opportunity of using illicit funds to influence the electoral outcome. And if you look at the trend in terms of the outcome of the election, and so I think some of you will agree with me that it does shows that the fact that money was not readily available affected the result, especially due to the presidential election, because you found that some gladiators actually lost their election in their supposed stronghold, which would ordinarily not have happened if resources were available and the EFCC didn't do anything in terms of tracking the flow of funds within the financial system, and also taking proactive measures by being physically present at full police stations to monitor those elections. Indeed, actually before the election itself, when the political parties were conducting their conventions, especially the two leading political parties, the People's Democratic Party and the All Progressive Congress, the Commission also took a proactive measure by deploying our operatives to monitor the conventions of those two political parties. And that was based on intelligence. We received information that money was going to be used to determine the candidates who emerged from those parties. And for us as a commission, that was worrisome because we have that understanding that if you have a corrupt political selection process, that also has serious implications for the fight against corruption, because a politician with integrity cannot emerge from a corrupt process. And so we deployed our operatives to monitor those elections. And the feedback that we got was that at least at the venues of those conventions, there was no evidence, clear evidence of the use of money in terms of the selection of those processes. That does not suggest that probably money did not change hands elsewhere, but what our operative found on ground established the fact that during those conventions, physically, you couldn't find any evidence that money changed hands. So I would say confidently that the presence of the commission during the election itself helped to a great extent in limiting the influence of money in terms of determining the outcome of the 2023 general elections. And additionally, I have talked about the outcome of the election in certain strongholds. And anyone who also observed those elections will discover that, unlike in the past, you now have people resorting to self-help. The violence that we saw in some of the states and zones, the violence and disruption of voting in some areas was as a result of the non-availability of monetary resources to influence voters. So people who couldn't actually induce voters with cash, and they knew that if they allowed the votes to count, they would not win, resorted to self-help, resorted to violence. And if we want to ensure that the integrity of vote in future elections is preserved, the nation and every stakeholder within the electoral process must join hands with EFCC and other security and law enforcement agencies to ensure that we take away violence from the Nigerian electoral process and allow the vote of the people to count in the elections. And so that I think is a summary of the role that the EFCC played in the 2023 general election.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Owujaren, for that insightful summary of what happened, and so many similarities, I'm sure, for those who are locked in, both in Nigeria and perhaps from other parts of the sub-region. So many similarities. I'm a Ghanaian, and listening to him, yes, it sounds so much like a Ghanaian election, a build-up to a Ghanaian election, but also very interesting, some of the measures that the EFCC put in place. For instance, Mr. Owujaren's reference to the visibility of their officials, which seemed to be an extended part of their strategy, and also how the scarcity of cash helped EFCC. Perhaps later on during Q&A, we can find out whether this was coincidental or it was part of a larger part of planning that these two instances came together. So all in all, thank you very, very much, Mr. Wilson Owujaren, for this, and we can move the conversation on a bit. So I'm going to bring up my panel now, because it's not just Mr. Owujaren. We have a host of other high-profile personalities who are joining us to have this conversation. And let me just introduce them so that we can get a move on. So first of all, I'll bring up Professor Emmanuel Remy Aide, and he's from the University of Ibadan. And I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Professor Emmanuel Remy Aide. He's a professor of political institutions, governance, and public policy in the Department of Political Science, with research work that connects public policy, international reforms, and democratic institution building. Now, he's been maintaining close contacts with the policy process. He has participated in building the governance and policy capacities of national and state legislatures in Nigeria. He's also provided expert and technical support to the then Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. So he certainly does know what he is talking about. So a big welcome to Professor Emmanuel Remy Aide. Joining him, we also have Dr. Damilola Agbalojobi, who is a political scientist and a gender specialist at the Obafemi Awolowo University. Now, Dr. Agbalojobi's research experiences began in 2006 at Redeemers University in Nigeria. Now, Damilola has written a couple of articles that have appeared in learned peer-reviewed journals and books on women in politics, women in peace building, gender and power, gender and corruption, gender and governance in Africa, gender and climate change, gender-based violence and sustainable development, violence in women in election, and more. So certainly somebody who does have extensive knowledge of gender and politics. Also joining us on today's panel is Hamzat Lawal, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Connected Development. and follow the money. Now, this is an organization he founded, and under his leadership, Code, that is Connected Development, won the One Africa 2016 award, which recognizes, rewards, and advances the exceptional work of Africa-based organizations dedicated to helping the continent achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So certainly a very loaded panel that we have put together this morning. So let me first of all say a big welcome. Gentlemen, if you can all unmute your microphones and just say a big hi for me, and then you can mute again. So hi. Okay, so I think we have everybody on, and I will start the conversation this morning with Professor Emmanuel Remi-Aide from the University of Ibadan. And Professor Aide, we just heard a striking keynote from the EFCC in terms of the efforts to preempt corruption during the elections. And we know that you've also been consulting for the INEC, which is the Independent Nigerian Electoral Commission. So you perhaps may have some additional insights. From your perspective, what is your assessment of the government's efforts to preempt the effects of corruption during the 2023 election, and how effective were they?
Well, thank you very much. I think generally Nigerians believe that this election was going to be an election with integrity. A number of innovations to promote or boost the integrity of the election were carried out and tested across off-season elections, most especially gubernatorial elections in places like Anambra State, Ekiti State, Osun State, and so on and so forth. And so the idea was those successful sub-national elections will now be implemented on a grand scale, which is at the national level. Some of the innovations included the effort to increase the transparency of the electoral process, the redesign of the balloting process in terms of customizing ballot to specific polling units, such that you can take one ballot paper from one unit to the other. And it was then also expected that with the idea of uploading results from the polling unit, the whole shenanigan that goes on between the polling units and the collation centers will be eliminated. So Nigerians live full of hope that this election will be an election of high integrity. But to our dismay, things didn't work out as planned. And you can also see in terms of the mobilization of security agencies to deal with one of the very high malpractice that occurred in the sub-national elections was vote buying. And so the idea is that the major challenge facing the electoral process was how to then reduce vote buying to the minimum, because it was the major issue that came out of the experimentation at the sub-national level. But it didn't turn out to be so. In fact, the challenge was systemic, because once the officials were not able to upload a result from the polling units directly into IREG as planned and as stipulated by the guideline in real time, the whole idea of eliminating the shenanigan between the polling unit and the collation center was not forestalled. And so the hope was dashed, and the entire process became questionable. And when you then follow that with the pockets of violence, the suppression of voters, the issue of profiling that occurred, ethnic profiling that occurred in some parts of the country, you see this is one of the worst elections in Nigeria. Indeed, people used to say that the worst election in the history of Nigeria was the 2007 election. But now there's a common comparison between this election and that 2007 election. Because as we speak, the disaggregated data of the 2007 election does not exist. That's how bad that election was. And now people are comparing this election with that election. So it was an election of dash hope, missed opportunities, and then failed effort by INEC to demonstrate the innovation that it has done over the years in 2023. So it wasn't a good election by any standard. And the reports of observers have been very consistent in describing the election as a flawed election.
Thank you for those thoughts, Professor Remi Aide from the University of Ibadan. Now, let me just add one more panelist from CISLAC, which is the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. And this is Awal Ibrahim Musa Rafsanjani. Now, he's a human rights, anti-corruption policy and legislative advocacy activist interested in positive transformation of Nigeria. And he's currently, like I said, the executive director of CISLAC, which is a non-governmental, non-profit legislative advocacy, lobbying, information sharing, and research organization. So I've added Mr. Musa Rafsanjani to the conversation. And in fact, my next question will go to you, Awal Rafsanjani, because I want to move the conversation slightly to the external perspective and look at things from the civil society point of view. What was CISLAC, for instance, your organization's experience of corruption in the election period, and what does your organization and others in the CSO space do to tackle this systemic issue?
Thank you very much. As you may know, Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, which is the national chapter of Transparency International, obviously what we do, apart from legislative engagement, has to do with issues of fighting, corruption, particularly political corruption. And therefore, we have been working before even the election to ensure that there's electoral integrity in the process. First, by making sure that the use of dirty money in politics is discouraged. So we had series of engagement with the different stake actors, political actors, non-stakeholders, non-stakeholders, and of course, both the stakeholders, to ensure that we even sanitize the process even before going to party primaries. We've been doing that with a number of organizations, both EFCC, ICPC, Code of Conduct, and other relevant organizations. So we also noted that one of the major areas which many people are not paying attention is the fact that we have a code of conduct that is supposed to ensure public, officials, appointees, elected officials, and civil servants declare their assets, and those assets are verified. And even when they leave office, they should also be verified. So we noted that there was a lacuna in the whole battle against corruption that does not look at how public officials actually siphon public taxpayers' money through dubious, declaration of assets to hide or to exaggerate what they have. So we engaged the Code of Conduct Bureau to make sure that Nigerians even understand that the Bureau existed, as well as also the Bureau operation, which we have been also battling with, because they are not able to make, asset declaration available and public to Nigerians. And therefore, CISLAC has been working with them to see that amendment in the Act, because that is, incidentally, that is the only organization that is mentioned in our constitution. All the rest are just National Assembly creation. So as important as an organization like Code of Conduct, and it doesn't seem to be, having even any headline, there's a problem. EFCC, ICPC, they are the one now being, had by Nigerians. Meanwhile, this is an organization that is supposed to ensure that they prevent corruption, they detect corruption, and ensure public integrity and service by ensuring that public officials did not amass walls, did not use it also for political corruption. So we engaged them effectively, and today many Nigerians appear to be aware of their own incapacitation their own, financial incapacitation as human incapacitation, because if you have to verify assets of over 5 million people across Nigeria, and you have less than 2,000 staff, who are, many of them are analog, they cannot even verify anything, they cannot do anything, then there's a challenge. So as important as that, bureau, nobody is paying attention to the work that they are supposed to do. So politicians, they do anticipatory declaration, and if you have 10 million, you just simply say you have maybe 50 billion, because nobody to checkmate you. And while serving in government within that period of 4 years, you will be able to steal that much. And because nobody is checking when you leave office how much you have acquired, they continue to siphon public taxpayers' money. So political corruption is a major challenge. Yes, EFCC, there's limit at which EFCC can do things. Once the political corruption and the politician at the center does not want that to happen. For example, there are some people who EFCC, as I speak to you today, have declared them, wanted, or they have issue with them, but they are being pushed for political leadership position. In fact, even currently they were appointed as ministers. So political corruption is a major disease that we have, because it is through political corruption that politicians find themselves into offices and continue to loot. Now, there's a difference from the corruption you had even during the military and today. During the military, you have limited participation of looters. Now, under democracy from 1999 to date, you have greater popular participation in looting of public funds. And that is why we cannot see democracy working. We cannot see development. We cannot see peace and stability in Nigeria because of corruption that has led to siphoning public taxpayers' money. And even the anti-corruption agencies themselves, they are handicapped because they will put their life, do all the necessary, legal battle to get judgment, and then somebody will just come and pardon those, politicians. So it is a big challenge that we have, which if we are serious in Nigeria, we have to look at political corruption, because the use of illicit financial flow to finance, political activities in Nigeria is what is making it impossible for competent, qualified, honest Nigerians to buy into any leadership position in this country, because everything is for sale. The form that you purchase from the political party is even, outrageous. Many people with decent money cannot afford, to buy even the form to fill in the political party. When you do that, you have to settle the party official. It is a commercialized process, and when you commercialize this process, the outcome of it is that you are going to have people who will come and reap their profit and recover their money, and therefore the development cannot be seen, because the resources that is meant for development, that is meant to ensure good governance, access to justice, equality, will not be there. So CISLA understand that one of the major obstacles we have in our political system is political corruption. And once you are able to fix political corruption, you will have prevented people. You don't need to wait until when these guys took over to perpetuate this crime. Once we know that there is a case on an individual person, you move on. But EFCC, despite the fact that they have declared one or two persons, still they have ignored them even from going, because there's a big power that is backing them, but that is backing those guys. So it is a shame that we are parading some people as leaders in this country at local, state, and national level who have corruption cases. Some of them have been even tried. Some of them have been jailed, but pardoned. Some of them, they are being under investigation. In a decent society, if you are being accused of corruption and you are under investigation, you cannot hold public office until that matter is successfully addressed. But because in Nigeria, the fight against corruption is in many instances limited to propaganda, limited to just a blackmail that someone is doing things. The agencies are doing their best, but they have limitation. There's a limit at which they can do things. So I think for us to move forward and to also looking at the 2023 general election, you could see that the use of money, like Osita was trying to say that it was not that much prominent. Let me tell you, the use of money in the electoral process, it is not this 2,000 naira, 3,000 naira that you give to this peasant. No, you use big money to buy up police, security generally, use big money to buy on INEC official, use big money to buy in every person that, including the electoral officials. You didn't pay them 2,000 naira, you didn't pay them with naira. What they did with that cashless thing was simply not, because the people who own the banks are the people who you are trying to say that they own the banks. Therefore, whatever they say, supply from central bank, the bankers, they carry this money to these people who own the banks. They are the board of directors, they are the owners of the banks. So it's only poor people, peasants like us, that goes to bank. Big men don't go to bank in Nigeria. And they didn't use naira. They use dollars, pounds sterling, estates, lands, and promise of appointment. So let us be clear on use of money. When we say use of money in the electoral process, it's not just 2,000 naira, 500 naira, Maggie, and the rice that they are giving to people they have impoverished, they have put in a perpetual poverty. No, we are talking about people who they bribe. If you are close to the power gossip, you will hear how much billions people are being given from the party primaries to the election. Confession is coming. Look at the scandal in Kaduna. Look at the scandal in Adamawa. Look at the scandal everywhere. So promise of appointment and juicy, contract is all part of what we are talking about. And even when Osinbajo came in 2015, they came on with this trader money, which is basically vote buying. That is why they are no longer giving this trader money now. Once they won the election, they stop everything. So we need to look at the use of money and electoral corruption from the broader perspective of political corruption. People using public taxpayers' money to siphon, and take over powers. Use of money. So let me not, maybe I should hold on here if there's any clarification or anything, but I just want to say that we need to look at corruption in the electoral process from a bigger dimension, not this 2,000 naira, 1,000 naira. Thank you.
Very, very impassioned points being made by Awal Musa Rafsanjani. That's what we expect from a civil society advocate and activist. And let me also encourage my panelists that if you want to say something, you can just put your hand up. I will get back to you in due course so that we can have a bit of an engagement as well, just in terms of clarification of points. I'll allot a few seconds to that. Now, let me bring in Hamzat a bit, because Hamzat's job is to follow the money. And there was no money to follow, according to Mr. Uwajoren, and also reports that at least were out there. So, Hamzat, what happened to the money during the elections?
Well, there's a lot of money to follow, interestingly, in Nigeria. But I think it all started with the primaries. It started with how the primaries were conducted. Yes, we saw that the EFC deployed their personnel, but money still exchanged hands, and we even gathered evidence and reports about how money is exchanged hands in the dominant political parties' primaries. And because we deployed observers, we didn't just deploy observers during the general elections. We started deploying our observers during the primaries, because for us, we wanted to observe the entire value chain. And it's just as if our politicians are 2 or 3 steps ahead of anti-corruption agencies, where they now deprive means. Even when there was cash crunch during the presidential elections, we still saw how money exchanged hands on the ground. And, the new Naira note was not available, or was seen not to be available, but there are people who had access to it, who had, access to millions of that Naira, and they used it to induce voters during the election. So there's a lot of money to follow. But I think by and large, this also tells on our values as a people and as a society. Yes, Rafsanjani have, spoke extensively about, the role of corruption and how individuals are more powerful than these institutions that are meant to checkmate corruption in the country. But I think that the corruption has now truly eaten deeper into the fabric of our democratic process. And when I say a democratic process, I'm also talking about both the role of INEC, the role of our security agencies, and also the judiciary. And it's really sad and unfortunate that we can't put in place mechanism to checkmate corruption or even prevent corruption. Because when you look at the act that empowers both EFCC and ICPC, one of their role is to actually prevent. They have laws that speaks about preventive measures. And then when it happens, they have laws that deals with it. But today, again, like I said, it's as if our politicians are 3 or 5 steps ahead of our anti-corruption agencies. And for me, really, I think it dwells more on intelligence gathering. I think this is where we need to also explore how can a citizen-led movement like Follow the Money, provide intelligence and information, and how governments are able to respond and use this data, in closing this loophole and dealing with people that are corrupt. Because what this literally means is we're going to dwell on abandoned projects. There's going to be inflation of budget or budget padding, whatever terminology we want to use, because a lot of people have invested heavily with their corruption proceeds for this election. And the first thing they want to do is recuperate their investment, because for them it's an investment. And this is the cycle we've been going through since 1999, So again, it's how can we gather intelligence and how can anti-corruption agency respond using this intelligence to act and prosecute people. I know that the keynote speaker referenced Ekiti elections. I know EFCC had apprehended people who had cash and they were in a stashed house where they were inducing voters. So we saw the whole media campaign, but today there's no knowledge or information on what's happening to the people who got arrested. Because if you want to rebuild back public trust and you want the Nigerian people to actually support the anti-corruption fight, timely information is really important, because now we're dealing with fake news, misinformation and disinformation. Now we're even dealing with AI deepfakes. So I think that the anti-corruption agency needs to be more proactive rather than responsive and providing timely information. And so civil society can also help amplify these messages, amplify their work, and we can be able to rebuild back public trust and entrench integrity into our society.
Thank you very much for that, Hamzat. And let me bring in Dr. Damilola Agbalojibi from the Obafemi Awolowo University. Move the conversation slightly a bit. Now, one of your many specializations, Dr. Agbalojibi, in the political sciences is looking at politics from the lenses of gender. And we've heard from the government perspective, and we've also just spoken to civil society. I want to move the conversation to issues around women in the elections. How did corruption impact women participation in the elections that we just saw?
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, it's beyond the election day for looking at how corruption has actually impacted women. Of course, one of the ways, let me start and go straight to my points. There's what we call financial obstacle. That corruption frequently results in the theft of public monies, which actually leaves all these political campaigns with insufficient funds, especially for those who actually need the money, not the big bags. And so it makes it more difficult for women to compete with these well-funded male candidates, as they already experience when it comes to financial difficulties. And so because of this gender inequality and the financial disadvantage that women find themselves, it's more and then to advance their causes. And so this is not just about the election itself, because there's a process, even getting to the primaries. And so secondly, there's the issue of discrimination in candidate selection. Corruption has a way of creeping into political parties when it comes to the method of choosing candidates. And somebody has said it this morning, resulting in the actions that kind of disfavor women. And so women may be routinely left off candidate lists or subjected to unfair competition when we have dishonest party leaders. Most of the time, what they do is they demand bribes. They have all manner of practices that nepotism. And so what actually happens is that we then have fewer women participating in election overall. And this is because of the corruption in corrupt institutions. And because most of the time most of them need influential people or groups to help them. And so as a result of this, these stifles voters, really women who actually supposed to be contesting, make them susceptible to such strategies. So the behavior can actually have a way of threatening them, forcing them to come out of such, even when they're interested. And of course, which we actually refrain women from actually participating. And also, thirdly, we have this issue of lack of accountability. From 2015 to date, women have been declining. We can't actually have women representing us when we don't even have them coming into contest for positions. And so because of this, lack of accountability is actually a problem. Corruption damages public faith in political institutions, and of course in the electoral process. How many women actually are able to actually go through processes? Many of them are discouraged. They do not even get to be nominated in their parties. Most times, even when they are told from experiences of people who have actually contested, they are told that nomination forms are so expensive and are told not to pay, or they are wait for them. They are meant to step down for the men who have paid so much money. And so this is actually a form of corruption. And so women who may be already encountering cultural obstacles and then also facing political financial obstacles because of the fact that they can't even afford the resources that they should need. And so we also have the issue of limited information access by women. Women access to data they need to make wise decisions may be hampered by corruption, because most times women find it difficult to find correct information about candidate policies, about the election process itself. Because when we have corrupt behaviors permeating the media, the educational system, or public discourse, this becomes kind of incapacitation to women. And so their inability to make educated decisions, to help them to engage actively, becomes a problem. And of course, corruption is actually also engendering or reinforcing this gender inequality we have in the society already. Because corruption makes gender inequality already persists in society, it makes it worse. It kind of strengthens this power dynamics that we have, given the fact that, of course, we have a patriarchal norms that is exceeding in our society. And this excludes women from political leadership. Because most times when they have to navigate these corrupt systems, women may encounter additional obstacles, which includes demanding for bribes. Sometimes they have to even pay using their bodies, sexual harassment, which actually discourage them from participating in political parties. And of course, this kind of climate that encourages women to vote in elections, it's only when women vote, a lot of women, when it comes to election, you see a lot of women, but when it comes to actually contesting for positions, which makes them capable of being representatives of different parties or at different levels of governance, we are the women. So at the primaries levels, they are kind of disenfranchised already, which creates a problem. So there's a need for us to have a fair and inclusive electoral process. And that can only be achieved where we put strict measures in place. All these anti-corruption laws that will encourage women, but for what we have right now, there's still a lot of, it's in a way disenfranchising women at all. We can see over the years that these numbers of women representing us at any level is declining. And this year is even worse, because despite the fact that we have this number of women coming out to vote, but how many of them are actually coming out to represent? So I think these are some of the ways, for me, which corruption itself is actually excluding women from actually coming out to represent us at different levels of governance, not just for voting. So at the voting level is not, because yes, women can actually come. It's only one of the ways corruption actually aids women, because most times they are even the most susceptible. So maybe this year we have not seen a lot of vote buying, but of course it still happened maybe not for those who are the line voting, but before the primaries, how many women actually came out? Why did we have these women? So there's a need for us to combat this voter suppression that is happening to women, because this for me is corruption itself. Thank you.
Very, very much for that, Dr. Agbala-Ajobi. I have so many questions for my panelists, so they should prepare. Mr. Wilson, Wajaren, Professor Aide, Dr. Agbala-Ajobi Hamzat, and of course, Hawa Rafsanjani, because we have people who are watching us from across the continent. So I'll try and mix up the questions and pass it along to whoever I think's field of expertise will allow. And the first question I have here, I'll pass to Professor Aide. And it's coming from Francis Roth, who says, voter turnout has declined. But he wants to know whether it has been the same in all the Nigerian states. And if so, is it just down to cynicism, or it could be something else?
Well, I think that if you look at the figures, it has continued to reduce over time. And it is not in any particular order in terms of whether in some parts of the country you have higher voter turnout than the other. It seems that if you look very closely, what you find is that in urban centers, and I think this also followed the literature, that a number of factors affect voter turnout. Instead of educated people being much more involved in the voting process, what you find is that those who are less educated account for the larger population of voters. So if you go to urban centers or centers where you have access to education, you are likely to have less voters than in rural areas where education is less accessible. So we find a situation where the more educated the population is, the less they are likely to vote, which then means that for the not very educated people, understanding the electoral process, the voting process itself, can be a major factor. But in general, for the 2023 elections, we have also seen situations where, because of the innovation that has come from INEC, voter suppression has become a major tool of reducing the number of those who vote, especially in urban centers where political parties have strongholds and they can easily manipulate the process. I mean, one of the contradictions of the Nigerian system is really that a cosmopolitan city like Lagos, which ordinarily you would think will have the highest number of votes, is actually where you find the lowest rate of voter turnout. Even in some elections, whether it's House of Representative election during the off-season, the voter turnout was even about 17%. So you find that in cities where you think that voting will be very high, it turned out to be very low because of voter suppression. In this particular election, we also saw how the belief that a certain ethnic group accounted for the outcome of the presidential election. There was major effort to suppress votes, which is not something new. If you look at what has been done with the National Union of Road Transport Workers in certain urban centers, you know that voter suppression is real. That organization has been mobilized by state governors as their foot soldiers for disrupting election in certain areas where they think that they are not very popular. That's one of the major tools of voter suppression that you find. So the real situation is that, yes, voter turnout is low across the country. We don't really have a large range of different disparity when you look across the country. But in some areas, for instance, in the Southeast, we have an unprecedented voters turnout simply because of the candidacies of the Labour Party. And then we also have a situation where younger people were mobilized to also participate in certain parts of the country. Otherwise, in most places, the voting pattern has been very, very traditional. And so the turnout is lower than previously, but if you look at the trajectory, it's actually been consistently lower than previous elections. In fact, we can provide the specific figures which is available in the literature. So voter suppression, level of education, level of mobilization of young people, all of these contribute to the voter turnout level in this election.
Thank you very much, Professor Heidi. And let me come back to Mr. Wilson Ujaren. And this was a question I had alluded to earlier, and it looks like it also caught the attention of Effiong Udo, who wants to know about the cash crunch, because he says much of the blame went to the CBN and not the EFCC. So when you talk about the scarcity of cash helping a bit in the EFCC's work during the election, was it coincidental or it was part of planning?
I think it was coincidental. The cashless, the Naira redesign was a policy of government championed by the Central Bank of Nigeria at the time, but it inadvertently helped the work of the EFCC, because for us as an organization, working through the financial system is helpful to us, because you are able to trace transactions through the financial system, but money outside of the banking system is difficult to trace. Hamza just talked about people deploying cash to compromise election. That will be possible because there's so much money outside of the banking system. But if those monies were within the financial services system and transactions take place through the banks, the reporting procedures are followed, EFCC will be better positioned to trace those transactions. But where they are outside the financial system, it's difficult to trace. That's why I said the Naira redesign policy helped at that time, because Nigerians were forced at that period point in time to go through the banks to transact transactions. There was so much of online banking practices going on at that time, so it was easy to follow the money, so to speak. But where you have people going to the black market to change Naira to dollars and all that, it's difficult to trace those transactions. I recall that during that exercise, the commission had to carry out raids of some bureau de change markets in Port Harcourt, in Abuja, and Lagos. And that was because we had intelligence that people were changing dollar into Naira to buy vote. But there is no amount of raids that you carry that will completely eradicate such practices. For where people embrace the banking system to carry out transactions, chances are that malpractices will be easier to detect. But the Naira redesign was not a policy of the EFCC; it's a policy of the federal government of Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ujaren. And let me ask this question of Awal Sanjani. And somebody wants to know, it says, why are convicted individuals undergoing trials for crimes allowed to still contest and hold political offices when the law clearly provides against that? Can anything be done to curb these practices?
Well, that is why when we talk about fighting corruption, people need to understand it is not just about making arrests, but to put system that can even prevent the corruption from happening. If we pay attention to blocking the leakages and making it impossible for corrupt people to have access to political power, we would have done a lot of saving the energy and the efforts and even the life risks of organizations like EFCC staff, ICPC staff, who don't even have, they don't even have life insurance. They go there facing these powerful, corrupt people, and at the end of the day, the power that is big will simply water down what they have done. So it's very frustrating if they will tell you, heart to heart, they are not happy because they put their life in the job. And then at the end of the day, one political statement from the power will simply water down everything that they have done. So if you look at the people who have violated the code of conduct, because you are supposed to be arrested if you fail to even declare your asset, you are supposed to be tried. As I speak to you, the whole nation has only one judge, one court, and one chairman and one judge. You can imagine you are dealing with over 5 million, public officials. Only one court, only one judge with another one, and they only sit in Abuja. Meanwhile, this covers local government, states and federal political office holders. So we are not yet ready to deal with systematic corruption in a manner that will prevent people. Secondly, when there's too much consideration for people who have been even investigated and tried and even jailed, and then suddenly, because of their relevance in the political winning election, they are now pardoned. It's very frustrating. It doesn't put us in a good public image locally and internationally. Thirdly, when people have presently stolen enough, and then you negotiate for them to give what many people believe like 10%, 20%, then the rest, they'll go and enjoy it. It's encouraging more looters, more criminals to perpetuate this. Look at the former Accountant General. Look at the money he stole, and look at how much government is able to recover from him. Completely insignificant based on the knowledge that people had of what he had, and many of them. Look at now, because of political consideration, EFCC is just being left shouting, inviting them and ignoring them, and they have not been able to. They don't have the capacity to deal with these people, because if they want to do that, somebody will call them, don't do that. Otherwise, let them tell you why is it that Akpabio, for example, Senator Akpabio is refusing to appear before them. Why is it that many, of these people, the power that is not looking at their cases? So we commend the work of anti-corruption agencies. We encourage them, we support them, we share the frustration that they also face, because they are putting their lives, and then at the same time, the power that has been, can simply not give them the space that they want to do. You think if they have their way, many of these people at local, state level who have been established as well-established, fraudulent, corrupt people, they will definitely stop them, but they are handicapped. In Nigeria, these guys are very powerful. So all I'm saying is that because of the political, system that we have, where political support is considered as a major important thing for political winning of election, some of the people who have been even indicted, some of the people who have been under investigated, they are being encouraged to come to the party, and support the party to win election. And when they win the election, they are even appointed. There are some people who, I tell you, at state, local, and national level, who have no business getting into political offices because of the bridges, because of the law they have broken. But because of the fact that they are being considered as serious political gladiators that can make, a party win election, their cases are actually either silenced or abandoned or completely, compromised. So It's a big problem. EFCC cannot fix this problem. ICPC cannot fix this problem. It's a problem that we have to fix collectively as a nation. The political elite in Nigeria must resolve to fight corruption. It cannot be left to the hands of EFCC or ICPC. How many of them? You have over 200 million Nigerians. How many staff do you have in EFCC and ICPC? And with this kind of massive resources, locally and internationally, these guys they have. If not that God is just beside these guys that are doing this, corruption thing, these guys, they can even eliminate them. They have the resources to do that. So we will continue to support anti-corruption, agencies, and, give them the necessary support, mobilize public against corrupt people, and demand accountability. We must continue to demand for accountability. Political accountability must continue to be demanded in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Awal Rafsanjani. My next two questions will go to Dr. Damilola Agbala-Jobi and Hamzat. The first one goes to Hamzat, actually, and it's from Abdul Karim Khatib, who says, don't you think that the digitization of state systems and the introduction of clouds and AI will greatly reduce the risk of corruption? So Hamzat, that question is for you. And for Dr. Damilola Agbala-Jobi, The question that I present to you is from Wale Olusola, who's asking if there were other elements of corruption outside of the monetary and financial inducement present in Nigeria's 2023 electoral process. So think about that for me whilst I listen to Hamzat's response on Abdul Karim Khatib's question on whether the digitization of state systems and production of clouds and AI will greatly reduce the risk of corruption in Nigerian elections. Hamzat.
I think we need to understand that technology, yes, it's great, it's an enabler, but the platform is used for both good things and bad things. You know, same with media and social media. So yes, I think it will help fight corruption if we use it effectively and judiciously. And if we're able to invest heavily in human capital development and the infrastructure that digitalization and artificial intelligence has to offer. But you have to also invest in big data. You have to invest in gathering intelligence, and then AI and digitalization can help you with analysis and also, help you solve corruption cases so that you can respond effectively. But again, the two sides to the coin. We use it well, it can help us. We use it wrongly, then it can cause us more problems.
Dr. Damilola Agbalajobi?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think there were other challenges in the trend when it comes to 2023 election, apart from financial. I think one of the problems I think Professor Ayede actually mentioned is the issue of lack of transparency when it comes to the 2023 election. A lot of people were expecting more from INEC when it comes to transparency, especially when it comes to deploying and of the results. I think that's why a lot of people questioned the outcome of the election, because they felt they didn't have the result as they should. And I think that's one of the reasons, because if people had gotten the results at when they should, especially when they said we are going to upload the results, I think some of these questions would have been sorted out. And so this is one of the challenges of the last election, lack of transparency. And I think INEC can do more when it comes to this issue, because it's important for people to have the results as at when it's live there and then, because it makes everybody, this fairness and justice will be there. People see that as you are voting and the result is being out, you're uploading it. It makes it easier, and then people will not question it. That's one of the things I think happened to the 2023 election.
And thank you, Dr. Agbalajobi. Let me come back to Mr. Ujoren. And this is a company from Anthony Ajayi, who says, despite the measures the EFCC deployed, there has been significant evidence of vote buying at the primaries in the general election. Is the EFCC prosecuting any of the bad actors for vote buying? And if yes, how many? And what's the spread across the states? If you can quickly give an answer to that question, Wilson, to Anthony Ajayi's question.
Thank you, Ajayi. Well, for now, from the outcome of the 2023 election, no one is being prosecuted at the moment because the investigation is yet to be concluded. The EFCC will not go to court until you have sufficient information to prosecute successfully. Secondly, I think for those who have, Hamzat made mention of that earlier, the commission will prosecute on behalf of INEC. INEC has to give the commission a fiat to prosecute those cases, because they are election matters. Ordinarily, it is the INEC that should prosecute. So the commission has to get the fiat of INEC to prosecute. But those cases are still under investigation and will go to court. But regarding the off-season election that they mentioned earlier, especially the Ekiti and Osun election, I can recall that we have charged a number of suspects to court in Ilorin, in respect of the Ekiti election. Those ones have been concluded and people have been charged to court. If Hamzat has been following my press releases, you will recognize I've issued our press releases concerning our arraignment of some of those that were arrested in Ekiti over the Ekiti election. But for the general election for 2023, we are yet to make any arraignment. But I can assure anyone who is listening on this program that arraignment will be made in due course.
All right, then. Thank you very much for that. And a big thank you to my panelists. And at this point, I'm just going to give everybody 30 seconds for closing comments. So I will start from Hamzat, then Awal, Dr. Agbalajobi, and then Professor Aide, and then Wilson Ujoren will wrap up for us. So everybody has 30 seconds quickly. to give us closing comments. Hamzat?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think as a country, we need to understand that each and every one of us have a role to play in tackling corruption. And as much as some people are aggrieved about the outcome of the 2023 general election, we cannot remain in one place. You know, as a country and as a people, we must continue to move forward and evolve and take lessons and close those gaps that the 2022 Electoral Act did not deal with. And as we go into 2027, you know, I believe that if we work together as government, civil society, media, private sector, we can make Nigeria truly great.
Mm.
Yes, let's hear you, Dr. Agbalajobi.
Okay, yeah, I think for me, scholars argue that when we have liberal democracy produce high presence of women and low levels of corruption. But what we have in Nigeria is high level of corruption and, of course, low level of women in politics. And this is because we have a corrupt setting. And so in such settings, we have recruitment of leadership is done actually in informal settings. And so for us to have a better setting where fairness and justice it's taken, but we need to eliminate corruption at all levels. And so it's important for us to have a reverse where recruiting to leadership positions will not just be taking place in informal settings that lacks transparency and that kind of impedes women from participating. We need to go to that level where we ensure that those processes of recruiting people into leadership positions is done through those formal institutions, which will go a long way to eliminate all levels of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Awa Rafsanjani, let's hear you.
Yes. So thank you very much. So I just want us to remind us that, you know, we must fight political corruption to be able to deal with issues of insecurity, issues of underdevelopment, issue of, you know, even lack of investment, because a lot of Nigerians are even taking their money outside Nigeria to go and invest, not to talk of even foreign investors to come, because if the country is rated and continue to be presented as a corrupt, you know, country with corrupt leaders, it will be difficult for international investors to come to the country. So it is our business, all of us as Nigerians, to join hands with all the, you know, efforts of the agencies that are fighting corruption to make sure that we contribute maximally to get rid of corruption and corrupt people in our system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Professor Aide?
Yeah, thank you. I think that we must recognize that the system in Nigeria cannot be seen in isolation from the people who constitute the system. And it is important for us to recognize that institutions can't defend themselves, except human beings defend those institutions. And it is better for us to adjust institutions when they have problems than to undermine them. So we must join hands to defend our institutions.
Thank you. And finally, Wilson.
Yes, I think my parting shot is that we all must recognize that the anti-corruption agencies alone cannot win the fight against corruption, that all of us as citizens have roles to play. If we have information, we need to share those information with the anti-corruption agencies so that they can be better positioned to do their jobs. If we join hands together, we can actually fight and win corruption.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you also to all those who joined this brilliant conversation between a public-facing entity and also public intellectuals. My name is Godfrey Akutubuafo. And as always, do read the conversation. Just go to your browser, type in theconversation.com/Africa, and a whole new world will be open to you for the academics as well. I will hand you over to Candice Bailey, who will wrap up and tell you how you can also write for us and join us. Back to you, Candice.
Thank you so much, Godfred. It sounded like you were giving us an ad there at the end. Colleagues, it was such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I want to just extend my thanks to Mr. Wilson Uwujaran from the EFCC. Thank you so much for the keynote. It was really insightful. To all the panelists, Professor Ayede, Dr. Agbala Jobi, Hamzat Lawal, and Awul Rafsanjani, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that Dr. Agbala Jobi is actually in the US this morning, and it's very early for her that she's joined us. We really appreciate your time this morning, to all of you and your insights, and for sharing your views on this topic. I mean, I think that what your views showed, it was a very, very interesting topic, and we could probably go on for another hour or two talking about all these issues, but we won't keep you too long. The last thanks just goes to the participants, whether you joined us on Zoom or whether you joined us via one of the online platforms. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, colleagues. Once again, as Godfred said, please feel free to subscribe to the Conversation Africa's website. To our website, read us on our website, or sign up to our newsletter, which you can get every single morning, and you can get some wonderful insights and analysis from academics across the continent in your inbox on a daily basis. You can find our newsletter subscriber link at our website, www.theconversation.com/Africa. Colleagues, thanks so much for your time, and have a good afternoon.